Hello and thank you for watching Dukascopy TV. Joining me in the studio today is Jean-Claude Manini from the Conference Board. We'll be discussing what impact a slowdown in China will have on the Europe area. Jean-Claude, thank you for coming in.
Thank you, and thank you for asking me.
Thank you. Now, could you tell me, how would you interpret the last LEI for China?
So basically it runs once again. It has been on a rising trend for a few months. So if you take it away, it is at the headline level, it basically signals that China may recover later in the year or the beginning of next year. Now, what is really important is also to look at the component of this indicator, because that's a composite indicators, and in that respect, only one component contributed to the increase during all these months, which are bank credits, and that's the result of the loosening of monetary policies by Chinese authorities. So that's the results they probably expected. But so far, it has largely failed to gain traction on the economy. So there are really question marks that are still risen by this index.
Okay, well therefore, do you think China will recover or continue to slow down short term? Actually,
that's the whole purpose of these indicators, of course, because their mission, call it that way, is to provide early signal of turning points. And as I said, the headline would suggest that the economy should recover soon. And there is, a possibility of that. Now, looking at the components, once again, there are question marks about the efficiency of monetary policy. So far, it has not been as effective as it was during the last downturn, in 2009. So there is, still question marks, and you just need to look at, for example, the whole spectrum of projections for GDP in 2013 to convince you that there is a low visibility and a lot of uncertainty, because there are many people who expect a recovery in economic activity to take place, but still there are people who expect a further slowdown, and so far there is no way to vindicate one camp at the expense of the other.
Okay, so what do you think the goal is of the Chinese authorities with the expect of economic growth?
Actually, that's a good question, because we know that China is an economy where, which is, really in some extent managed by the authorities, and where usually, authorities had some room for maneuver and some traction on the economy. But there are really question marks in this case, because we know that their main goal is not necessarily growth per se. That's really improving the living standard of the population. And now, they have a new goals, which is also to rebalance the economy towards less exports and more consumption. And in that respect, actually, there have already been, some positive development. For example, over the last year, the firm of profits have been really squeezed, while incomes have continued to, wage incomes have continued to grow significantly. So in some extent, Chinese authorities are already, moving in the direction of their goals, and probably have less incentive to really, make efforts to boost the economy. So that's another question marks, and that's why, we need, to be concerned about the outlook for China, for the rest of the world. And especially for Europe, which is, highly dependent on exports currently.
Okay, so what impact will Chinese growth be on the euro area, do you think?
That's really depends. First of all, it's logic. On the nature of the cycle in China, and on the magnitude, because even if it continues to slow, the impact will not necessarily be really important. Actually, the importance of China on European export has definitely grown over years, especially for countries like Germany, which are really exposed to the global manufacturing cycle. But still, it represents, slightly more than 5% of exports. So that's not, a big chunk of exports. So in that respect, that does not really represent a big threat. Actually, in our view, the main concern that people, especially business people, should have about the outlook for China are not about growth in itself, but really the consequence for firms. In that respect, for many European firms, in particular, multinationals, the exposure to Asia and in particular China is really significant. So it's more at the firm level that the impact is likely to be felt, let's say in the case of worst case, than at the aggregate level. So it's more, let's say, an issue for business people than it should be for policymakers, or to some extent for people investing in Europe.
With this in mind, the depreciation of the renminbi, is that sustainable against the euro, do you think?
That's a good question, and actually, it basically depends on two things. So far, I mean, we know that, I mean, the Chinese, I mean, the Chinese renminbi, I mean, is a managed float, in theory against a basket of currencies, but I mean, it's largely anchored, I mean, on the dollar. So basically, the question is, where do you see the euro-dollar going? And it will largely depend on what the Federal Reserves and the European Central Bank does. But there is, I mean, another issue is that, I mean, is it really sustainable for Chinese authorities to accept, I mean, a further depreciation of the euro against the renminbi while Europe has become the main trading partner for China? And at this stage, I mean, that's really the question marks. Officially, they are committed to gradually implement a more flexible foreign exchange market, but I mean, that's still a big question marks. So, if they get some relief, let's say, from the Fed, which apparently, I mean, may implements further quantitative easing, and therefore get some relief on the euro-dollar, then it's probably will not be, I mean, an issue for Chinese anymore. So they will probably not act on the euro. If, on the other hand, I mean, the euro continue to depreciate, I think that it may clearly, I mean, become an issue for Chinese authorities that may lead them, I mean, to rethink their foreign exchange strategy.
And as for the euro area, the question of a Greece exit seems to have come to the forefront once again. What do you think will happen?
In theory, I mean, a default and an exit are still possible, and the consequences would not necessarily be as dramatic, I mean, for the rest of the euro that some may think. But I mean, our baseline scenario remain that, I mean, Greece will stay, and that beyond that, a breakup of the euro will be avoided. And I think that in that respect, because you asked the question of, let's say, of the calendar, early September is really key, because the ECB will first, I mean, tells how it intends to intervene, if it will. And secondly, I mean, there is a question mark about Spain, because if Spain wants a support on the secondary bond market, it will needs to require a formal help. So that's really, I mean, the key. But in our view, I mean, there is likely to be a requirement for help, because I mean, the cost is it will probably not be that high as Spain, because Spain already implemented so much stringent measures that, I mean, its European partners are likely to ask that much from it. And then it would pave the way for European Central Bank interventions. And we tend to think that it could be, to some extent, a game changer. It can really buy time to implement, I mean, structural reforms, institutional reform. And of course, I mean, it's the most important of them, I mean, in the short term, which is the implementation of a banking union.
Well, clearly a lot remains to be seen, but thank you, Jean-Claude, for your perspective today.
Thank you for seeing me.
Thank you. Now, that's all we have time for at the moment, but the DukascopyTv team will continue to bring you all the latest news throughout the day, so please do stay tuned. Goodbye for now.